All right, so allow me to introduce Julianna Tetlow. She is our Director of Government Relations with the San Diego Humane Society, and Jennifer Fearing, who is the President of Fearless Advocacy. So Julianna and Jennifer, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Welcome everybody. We're so pleased that you are here with us today, joining us for this presentation. We will start off by introducing ourselves. Jennifer, take it away.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. As I mentioned, I'm Jennifer Fearing. I'm actually coming to you from Sacramento, where I live and where I've had the pleasure for the last, I think, 6 years, close to 6 years, of representing the San Diego Humane Society as a lobbyist at the California State Capitol. I have a long history in animal advocacy. I got my start at my local animal shelter, which is now called the Front Street Shelter for the city of Sacramento, when I found a stray dog and brought him to the shelter and found out how under-resourced they are, and discovered at that time just how few resources they were for low-income pet owners to get affordable spay neuter, etc. I became a super volunteer. I started a spay neuter coalition, and before too long, I wanted to do animal advocacy full time. So I did a stint with an animal disaster response organization, and then headed off to the Humane Society of the United States, where I worked for a couple years in DC, and then for several years back here at the California State Capitol, directly engaging with the members of the legislature and administrative agencies like the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the governor's office, et cetera, working meaningfully to pass reforms, animal protection laws and regulations. I'm pleased to say that for at least the last 15 years, any animal protection law that's gone on the books, I have had a lot to do with that one way, shape, or form. And I've been very pleased over the last several years to be the voice of San Diego Humanes, to make sure that the expertise on our team and San Diego Humane is influencing how laws are written in Sacramento. So here's me trying to save the local animal shelter a few years back, and riding around the state with Sutter Brown, RIP, Governor Jerry Brown's beloved corgi, who was the first dog of California for a number of years. And then I do like to warn people that you are in the presence of a scandalous person. One of the funniest things that has happened to me in my career was when the NRA filed a formal complaint against me because the Governor Brown used to let me babysit Sutter Brown when they went out of town, and the NRA claimed that I was providing an illegal gift to the governor and not reporting it as a lobbyist, when all along I knew full well that there's a specific regulation that exempts acts of neighborliness and things that people do for one another in civil society. For example, feed a cat or walk a dog. So, but I got to be on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle committing this scandalous act of dog watching. So I'm looking forward to talking with you all tonight about what we've been up to for the last year and change, and what we're looking forward to working on going forward. Julianna?
Thank you. So I'm Julianna Tetlow, Director of Government Relations for the San Diego Humane Society. In February, I will have been with our organization for 4 years. Jennifer likes to end with her scandal. I like to lead with mine. Before coming in-house with San Diego Humane Society, I was working for a lobbying firm who was contracted to assist with the procurement process of 6 new municipal contracts, including the city of San Diego, and exploring contracting with the county to provide services in the unincorporated area. Now, in my time working in San Diego, both as a lobbyist and previously as a policy and community outreach director for a City of San Diego council member, our lovely local publication, the San Diego Reader, has written a few articles about me, but none that have amused me more than being called a big dog lobbyist, along with a picture of me as a poodle. Now, I personally consider myself more of a Doberman, but do appreciate the sentiment nonetheless. In my nearly 4 years with San Diego Humane, in addition to working on our policy initiatives, I've led contract negotiations for 7 new municipal contracts and renegotiations for 6 additional existing contracts. We are working on bringing a few more cities in the county on board in the next 12 months, hopefully. So stay tuned for more on that in the future. And in addition to my work in San Diego, I spent a decade working up in Sacramento for the California State Assembly, working on policy and constituent affairs. So at San Diego Humane Society, we are united by our mission to create a more humane world for people and animals. Our culture of care inspires our interactions internally and externally. And in addition to informing our core values of compassion, courage, impact, inclusion, and integrity, it guides us to promote and support an environment of mutual respect where all staff, volunteers, and guests feel a sense of inclusion and belonging, and to foster an environment where everyone feels empowered to share their ideas and experiences. We've been absolutely blessed with a whole coalition of humane champions, or humane heroes, as we like to call them, including Assemblymember Marie Waldron, who actually joined us for the grand opening of Project Wildlife. She has a history with songbird rehabilitation and very connected to our organization. Senate Pro Tem Tony Atkins, who has always been a friend to the organization and championing our policy efforts. Todd Gloria, former assembly member, now mayor of the city of San Diego, has been a fantastic partner. And Brian Mainstein most recently honored us with the designation of Nonprofit of the Year for his assembly district, which was really fantastic. Also very exciting, just tomorrow now we have our, and Jennifer, you may have to help me with how many annuals this is. It's our 4th, maybe 5th annual Gloria 100 event. Started when he was in the legislature and continues now as our mayor, which is a fantastic partnership that we've been able to develop with him. So we'll talk to you a little bit about advocacy and activism and sort of the differences therein. Jennifer, if you'd like to start.
Sure. So we'll move into the content for tonight. I'm looking forward to getting through this material and into a conversation with the rest of you. I'd love to know what all of you are up to and what you're passionate about when it comes to animal advocacy. But we like to start with kind of level setting what we're primarily talking about tonight. There's lots of different ways that we work to as individuals or as organizations, like work to try to influence how other people in this case treat and think about animals. We do peer-to-peer, and when we try to convince members of our family to go meatless on Mondays or to adopt their next animal from an animal shelter, that is obviously a form of personal advocacy. When we attend a protest of maybe a pet store or promote a boycott of some activity where animals are being mistreated, that is also a form of advocacy that tends more into activism, right? We're showing up with our person, and we're often carrying signs and really trying to draw attention and notoriety to a concern that we have about a business activity or another social, maybe socially accepted use of animals that we're trying to, get the public to think differently about. And then I even think that when we're tabling, at fairs or other things where we're providing information and education to other pet owners or other citizens, that form, that just being available to people, making ourselves available to people and bringing materials and education to folks, we are also showing up in our roles as advocates. And we describe these things because not, different strokes for different folks, right? I like to say that I'm all of these things. I've been this person at various times, and it's really driven by the activity that I am participating in at any given moment. But these are all tools, right, in the advocate's toolkit that are all appropriate at different moments in time in different campaign tactics. But tonight we're primarily here to talk about our experiences and some recent developments in the world of political and legislative advocacy. So you've already heard us referring to all of these different state elected officials and the mayor, and the relationship building with those folks is a big part of the work that Julianna and I do, so that we have folks who care about San Diego Humane's position, that they see us as a resource and as experts when it comes to animal welfare, so we can help advise them and in shaping policy or budget expenditures. And this is a picture of me with a bit of a pursed lip, frustrated obviously after someone testified where I worked. This is back in 2000. I'm not even sure, I'm going to date myself. This is at least 10 years ago when then Speaker Tony Atkins championed the closing of a loophole in California's law that was meant to end the elephant, ivory, and rhino horn trade, but because of serious flaws in the way that law was originally drafted back in the 70s, that trade was unfortunately flourishing in the state of California, and we had been able to document that. And so we're going to talk a little, we're definitely happy to answer questions at the end as well about what it's actually like to take, an idea of, hey, we need to do something about this loophole, all the way through the legislative process here in Sacramento, through to being passed as a law, funded in the budget for enforcement, and actually implemented and making the difference that we always hoped it would, because it's a long process, but it is accessible and available to all of us to be part of.
Thanks. And I just want to note that while both advocacy and activism play an important role in policy change, from San Diego Humane's perspective, we really believe our role sits within the advocacy space. While we may find ourselves disagreeing with traditional industry opponents and even sometimes with our own animal welfare colleagues, we believe respectful discourse ensures us a seat at a table to have meaningful discussions, to find common ground and areas of compromise. And certainly, as Jennifer mentioned, it takes time. So while it can sometimes be really frustrating not to be able to affect the change that we want to see immediately or all in one shot, baby steps are at times better than no steps at all.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people ask the question, like, what is the purpose of trying to effectuate changes in the laws? Like, we have all these different tools in our toolkit. What role does legislating play in this? And it's important to note that in California, not dissimilar from other states, but in California, many laws kind of governing day-to-day animals are actually are local ordinances. They're your city and your county have ordinances on the book that may relate to leash laws, and they will get the specifics of what happens when a dog bites someone, et cetera. Those are laws that live at the local level. And while they're pretty similar across the state, and they are really driven by city councils and county supervisors, create and enact those ordinances and enforce them. But at the state level, the state sets the broad kind of policy tone. And we have a lot of, California is a robust state for humane lawmaking. There's every year, there are numerous animal bills. That's not a new phenomenon. California has been at the forefront for many years of seeing state legislators seeing as a very valid purpose to their time in Sacramento to make sure that the laws on the books are setting a broad, humane standard for the whole state. So I also have felt that they legitimize, right, animal protection. If you're in the forum of public policy, animal protection isn't something that's seen, as relevant, and then it makes our cause sort of seem less than or sort of off to the side. And so showing up and being present at the public policy table is a way of legitimizing our cause and our goals for a more humane society. We're able to generate public dialogue and educate people. In 2010, if you would have asked me what shark finning was, I would not know what you were talking about, and I certainly wouldn't want to know. Certainly wouldn't have known what purpose it was. And I had been an animal advocate for some time, and then it was brought to my attention, and our organizations gathered with others and decided that we had to do something, because actually it turns out 73 to 90 million sharks per year are pulled up out of the ocean. Their fins are sliced off. They're thrown back to bleed alive and drown, all to make a delicacy, a conspicuous sort of high-end delicacy in some Asian countries called shark fin soup. The fact of we did a bill trying to ban that, the trade of that in California, educated legions of people, not just in California, but across the world, because of the media that we were able to generate, the celebrities who got involved in that effort, and the fact that California was one of the first governments on the globe to set down a marker about outlawing the trade in those fins. And we've been able to watch ever since the cascading positive effect that's had as state after state and other countries have moved in the same direction to protect sharks from that trade. But that starts sometimes with dialogue, and a bill is a news, makes you newsworthy. It generates people talking about something. And so often I will feel that even if a bill doesn't pass on its first try, the dialogue that was generated, the education of folks is sometimes a great first step and a necessary first step. You cannot cure what you don't even understand. And then lastly, some situations simply require concrete changes in the law. The humane law enforcement folks at San Diego Humane cannot go out and write citations at pet stores for inhumane treatment if there are not laws on the books that specifically identify what those minimum standards are, and have fine amounts, for example, codified that allow that kind of accountability to take place. So next slide, Juliana. These are just, again, some examples of like, without laws on the books, we don't have any reach, right? We can advocate all we want. We can want societal change and try to persuade as many people as we can to do right by animals. But sometimes you just want to codify that minimum standard and have meaningful accountability associated with those who do not meet it. Next. And to give folks a sense that, because we're talking primarily about state legislation tonight, just of the process, it's California is a very, very active full-time state legislature. And our legislature runs fully from the beginning of January into September or October, depending on whether it's an even or an odd year. And a fun fact is our legislature runs every year 100 days longer than the second longest running legislature in the country. So it's very busy, and that explains why maybe it might take a Juliana plus a me to keep up with animal bills, because throughout that you can see throughout the year, bills move from being introduced to being heard and discussed and voted on in policy committees to being voted on by the entire Assembly or the Senate. Our Assembly is our lower house. There are 80 members of the California State Assembly, and then there are 40 members of our California State Senate. And every bill needs to be passed by a majority of both of those houses in the same form, and then go to our governor and have to either be signed or vetoed by his deadline. We just passed one. October 10th was actually Governor Newsom's deadline this year for signing and vetoing bills. And all of the bills that he signed on by October 10th, unless the bill stated differently, automatically become law on January 1st of 2022. So I have a little COVID symbol asterisk up there because it has been super weird the last 2 years. I have been into the Capitol one time since March of 2020. It has been an almost completely remote circumstance. I can't even begin to tell you how weird it is for an advocate and a lobbyist, where all of our work is typically relational. It's relationship, it's connecting with people, it's seeing things, it's observing who's talking to who, it's getting gossip from people. And guess what? You don't schedule a Zoom to gossip. Like, it doesn't happen that way. You have to bump into people on the way to the bathroom. So it's been a completely unusual and bizarre experience. And in some ways that's to help explain and manage our expectations. That we have a couple exciting things to tell you about tonight, but normally in a normal year, we're working on like 8 to 10 bills, and the Capitol, there has been limits because of COVID placed on the number of bills. And really, last year, most things didn't move at all because anything that wasn't deemed directly COVID related was shelved for the year. So it's been a time, and but we have managed to make some significant progress for animals anyway. Next.
So I want to talk a little bit about factors that matter. There are many factors that play when we at San Diego Humane are considering taking a position on legislation, or when we're asking a legislator to author legislation on our behalf. For the former, I cannot stress enough that the devil is in the details. It is absolutely critical to read proposed legislation or regulatory changes word for word. Something as simple as shall instead of may turns a recommended best practice into a mandate and could carry with it different impacts for local governments and service providers. And this becomes particularly impactful for shelters who are already under-resourced. Sometimes mandates are appropriate, but they need to be funded. Sometimes a simple wording change can ensure the codification of important policy while allowing flexibility for implementation. It should also be noted that policymakers and elected officials are not issue area experts in every arena in which they're proposing legislation for. And so they really rely on our expertise to help guide the crafting of responsible policy that doesn't result in unintended consequences. One example that I think really kind of perfectly illustrates this is SB 313, that was introduced by San Diego Senator Ben Hueso in 2019. And it was titled the Circus Cruelty Prevention Act and described as a prohibition on the use of animals in circuses. So just at first blush, that sounds really great, right? Wholly supportable. Upon closer inspection of the language, the way they had written the carve out for educational programs would have actually categorized our Project Wildlife programs where our animal ambassadors were present as a circus. That was not the author's intent, but without input from organizations like ours who can inform policymakers of the practical implications of the way that their language is written, the impact could have been pretty detrimental to legitimate organizations who are providing valuable education to members of the public. Other critical factors include cost. Can agencies who are tasked with implementing new laws actually afford to do so? Lawmakers are also responsible for looking at whether proposed laws carry with them general or other funding implications or whether there is no fiscal impact. Implementation and enforcement are also key. As I'll discuss in a few slides, there are times when laws were passed and when it comes time for implementation and enforcement, it becomes readily apparent that loopholes exist or there are fatal flaws discovered with that legislation. It is worthwhile to take the time to engage all stakeholders to try and catch these issues before a bill becomes a law. And finally, history and precedent, bandwidth and capacity all play important roles when planning a legislative agenda. Questions such as, has something like this been proposed before? What were the arguments in support and opposition? How receptive were lawmakers to making this issue a priority should all be answered before proposing a path forward.
Yeah, so we have a history of working collaboratively with our colleagues around the state. San Diego Humane is one of, I'm going to say, between 200 and 300 animal shelters that are either run by cities or counties, sort of municipal animal shelters, or private, nonprofit shelters like San Diego Humane. We're all united through, there's a trade association called California Animal Welfare Association that most organizations are members of. But then just generally speaking, as colleagues, we really favor efforts to pursue legislation that have the input and have really taken the time to think through what the meaningful impact is for everyone. This is a very big state. And as you're well aware, the disparities in resources and history in different cultures, you name it, like it's just extremely diverse. And when you're looking to pass a state law, that law doesn't really discriminate about based on whether like you're in a wealthy part of the state that's deeply advanced in your animal welfare resources and your trajectory, like that. We're writing kind of minimum standards effectively that everyone in the state has to be able to live up to. So we just wanted to give a couple of examples that tee up something that was exciting that finally came to fruition, and just to share too how like preparation, like we have to be in this like over the very long haul. But some of you may remember back in like the late 1990s, former Senator Tom Hayden, who has sadly passed away, proposed a law. Everyone calls it the Hayden Law after him, but it basically set a policy for the state of California that no adoptable or treatable animal would be euthanized. And it was certainly something as a policy matter that everyone could get behind. It was controversial at the time. I'm not going to lie. There were municipal animal shelters for whom the idea of being able to be able to live up to that policy was completely unfathomable, given the numbers of animals that they were seeing come through their doors and the amount of money that their cities and counties were giving them to address it. But it was on the books, and it sets a minimum hold time. So for example, like that animals that come in the shelter have to be held for a minimum period of time before they can be euthanized. And when we had hit a recession in the state of California, and because that law had been judged to be what's called a local mandate, because that hold period triggered costs for local governments, the state was then required to budget funding to help cities and counties pay for that. When we hit this recession, we had governor after governor suspending those mandates, and that meant it threw this Hayden Law into chaos. Like it was like, is that applying right now? Is the hold period here or not? Now cities and counties aren't getting the money. What does that mean? And in kind of a unique circumstance, we came together across 18 different government organizations, nonprofit animal welfare organizations, including national organizations and local ones. And we spent close to a year deeply analyzing like what impacts the Hayden law had on animal shelters around the state, and what if we were serious as a state about getting to that policy, about achieving it, what would it take to get there? What resources would we need? What best practices should get adopted by different animal shelters? And what changes in law, if any, what law was it, legal issues were in our way that we would want to tweak the law to help us maximize life saving across the state. And so we issued this white paper. It's still online. You can go to cashelteringreport.org. Gary can maybe tell us later, because he was all the way in Washington, D.C. running a shelter when we did this, but we sent some pretty good shockwaves across the country that we had come together to really think about this in this way and publish this paper. And I can tell you that we moved too fast. We tried to introduce a reform bill the next year, and the whole thing just blew up in our face because there were too many new ideas in there that were controversial, that people just had not had time to sit with and did not understand that there was evidence to support changes that felt wrong to people. So for example, one of our recommendations was that we should loosen that hold period when it comes to like small kittens or puppies or animals that for whom they don't thrive in shelters. That yes, we need to hold animals before, we shouldn't euthanize them any faster, but we should release them alive as fast as we possibly can to foster homes or rescue groups or others who are better situated to meet those animals' needs right away. We were able to, over the course of the last several years since that paper came out, pass various changes like those into law. And then that morphed into when Governor Newsom was running for office. And I will just tell you guys this kind of insider story. Some of you may remember that when the governor was mayor of San Francisco, there was a very horrific and tragic dog mauling case. There was a strong reflexive action at that time, demand to change the state law, which prohibits cities and counties from discriminating by breed. There was a strong push. This had been a Presa Canario, a dog, but somehow it became, it became a pit bull, because that's how media works. And there was a strong effort in Sacramento. We were able to prevent the state from making that change. But then when he was mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom was super in favor. Like, he came out strongly in favor of breed discrimination. So when he was running for governor just a couple years ago, pit bull advocates across the state were starting Facebook groups and attacking the governor, saying he cannot be governor, he hates pit bulls, etc. And his campaign reached out to me. I'm like, what can we do about these pit bull people? I'm like, well, you could start by admitting you were wrong. And that actually that breed discriminatory laws do not work. And I was able to work with them on a campaign statement, not just about that issue, but Governor Newsom, when he had been lieutenant governor and mayor, had also done a lot of awesome things for animals, had supported a number of bills. So I think we need to find a platform to add to your campaign website that addresses that pit bull issue and acknowledges that you understand now how dealing with dangerous dogs is a dog by dog process. But we were able to put a whole bunch of promises. And one of his promises was that he wrote on his campaign website, I will ensure that every California community has the resources they need to meet the state's 20-year-old commitment to not euthanizing any dogs or cats who are adoptable or treatable. So that slid into his campaign plan. And then he became governor. And then the question was, what will we do? How would we make that happen? What can we bring to the governor as a proposal for how much money we need and how we would go about doing that? So next slide. I am pleased to tell you that it took us the last 2 years, but in this year's California state budget is $50 million that was given to the UC Davis Shelter Medicine Program, who is the best situated state entity to help administer a new program that will work to identify the communities around the state that are the farthest away from reaching their life-saving goals. and work with them one-on-one to identify the best practices and other changes they need and resources they need. And then they'll basically be able to get that, not just their prescription pad out for what they need to do to save more animals, but then their checkbook out too, and write a grant courtesy of the taxpayers of California to implement new life-saving capacity, whether it's new veterinarian or a new spay-neuter clinic, or hiring a volunteer coordinator, whatever it is. These experts at Davis, collaborating with other shelter leaders, are able to help these other communities get what they have been missing for so long to catch up with the rest of the state of California, so that we can finally reach that goal. So that's going to be, you're going to be hearing more about that over the next 5 years as that program rolls out. But it is really the fruition of all the way back to 1997 when the Hayden Law passed, and then the 10-year ago white paper that we did, and that all of that preparation and this work. And I want to give such a major kudos to San Diego Humane and other what I call have shelters, right? Shelters and communities that are supporting them. I really just so grateful to see them step up for these resources that, San Diego Humane may not get $1 of that 50 million, but they were right there. We were right there pushing hard to make this happen, because we're invested in seeing animals across the state of California and the people that love them. They should get the kind of care they deserve regardless of where they live. And we recognize that these other communities need extra state support. So that is hugely exciting development that, frankly, thanks to this very odd COVID era budget where the state has a lot of extra money, that we were able to get this thing. And we owe it to Governor Newsom. He's personally endorsed this and put it in his budget and carried it through. And so he's a good dude. The second thing we just want to bring to your attention, because funding, this was a big year for funding from the state for animals, is that a couple years ago, thanks to Senator Bob Hertzberg in the San Fernando Valley, whose constituents, it was his neighborhood associations who actually brought him this idea. They were deeply concerned about the welfare of the homeless, the unhoused Californians and their pets, and that the shelters that were taking folks in were not accommodating people's pets. And we just know the heartbreak of the companionship that exists for these folks with their animals. But that these constituents of his wanted to know that could be some state funding to help support shelters, homeless shelters that were willing to accommodate pets and provide basic veterinary care for those animals. So a couple years ago, we got $5 million in the budget to initiate a new pet assistance support program out of our state housing community development agency. And it was so popular with homeless service agencies that applied for that funding that twice as many dollars were needed if they'd wanted to be able to approve everyone who asked. So very, again, pleased that Senator Hertzberg championed this year $10 million more dollars. So that'll be a total of $15 million that'll be going out. Gary at Julianna may be able to tell us a little bit about this. This money has come to San Diego, and you have there are partner organizations with San Diego Humane who have utilized this money, and about 90% of it is going to veterinary care. So we know it's addressing serious welfare, what would be serious suffering on the part of these animals if they weren't able to get that treatment, and of course the heartbreak of their human companions if they weren't able to afford to give it to them. So this was pretty epic year in terms of being able to get resources to vulnerable Californians and vulnerable animals, and it's going to last us quite a while and do a lot of good. And this is just a cute cartoon drawn of the governor when he proposed the shelter funding. Next. So just quickly switching to legislation, we are excited that in the last 2 years, we've been able to fix two kind of perennial problems that have faced pets in California. The first is a kind of little known unless you've been paying attention to these legislative efforts, but in California is a very weird state when it comes to what's called pet blood banking. So if you've ever had an animal that was in an emergency that required a blood transfusion at the veterinarian, you might have wondered, where is the blood coming from for this? Well, it turns out in California, it has to, by law, be coming from one of two what are called closed colony facilities, which are basically like for better or worse way to describe it, kind of research labs where dogs are kept caged or crated for most of their experience, where their blood is harvested on a regular basis. And regardless of whether those animals are kind of kept in those conditions in a humane way or not, I think we can all agree that that is a very archaic way to think about how we get blood. And it turns out it's also not a very it's not a very adequate one. We have a chronic multi-year shortage. It's a 6 to 8 week lag for emergency veterinarians who need blood. And you will hear stories all of the time of people who are like driving to Reno, driving to another state to try to get blood or platelets to bring back to their veterinarian because they can't get any, because there's only these two. And so we could spend all night talking about how we got to that weird place. I'll skip that for now, but it has been a 3-year effort to try to work very closely with the California Veterinary Medical Association and the California Veterinary Medical Board. And we think we finally threaded the needle and got a bill to the governor's desk that he just signed a few weeks ago. On the very last day of his signing period, he signed into law the California Pet Blood Modernization Act, which is, as of January 1st, going to allow licensed California veterinarians to do what's called community blood banking. They will be able to get a special license and some continuing ed and training to start recruiting, dogs over 50 pounds that are healthy, to start doing voluntary blood banking, just like we humans do. And they will be able to actually lawfully provide like supportive kind of care. So if it's someone, if it's a dog that needs heartworm preventive in order to stay healthy, or certain diagnostics, they will be able to be provided those free of charge if they join a blood banking program. And then the coolest part of the bill is also that once California establishes this community blood banking and it's successful enough, there's a trigger in the bill that will require those closed colony operations to stop operating in that form. They will be able to exist as companies, but they will have to change the sourcing of their blood to the voluntary model. They will no longer be able to keep captive dogs for that purpose. So this is an example of kind of a wormhole, to be honest with you, like a very kind of small, it seems like a small issue, is super complicated. It was actually one of the hardest bills I've ever had to work on, kind of drafting and getting it right. But I really just want to say how grateful I am here to the California Veterinary Medical Association, who really came to the table despite concerns. You get kind of used to the way things work. And even if they're not great, you're nervous about what like change could mean. And I think veterinarians have struck me as a little risk averse in my advocacy experience. And so this was a big deal. And I hope it portends like opportunities in the future to be able to work as trusted partners to work on other problems that our alliance with veterinarians could really help us solve some big problems together. So
Jen, you think we're ready to get a declaw ban going?
I'm actually really proud to say that the California Veterinary Medical Association just yesterday announced a new policy.
That's good.
Under that kind of pressure. That sounds like they're really sort of turning to try to voluntarily, eliminate declaw, except in the most extreme circumstances in California. So
that's progress. Super
big progress. And I think that's what you want, right? At the end of the day, you don't necessarily need a law if an industry is willing to get to the right place voluntarily. That's the goal. That's the gold standard. But sometimes the pressure of facing a potential law can cause folks to move in the right direction on their own. Juliana, did you want to talk about Bella's Act?
I do, and it's interesting. It's kind of a nice segue. It is great when industries choose to do the right thing. When industries do not choose to do the right thing, then it does necessitate legislation. And that's sort of where we found ourselves with our sponsored legislation, AB 2152. We're so incredibly proud of our partnership with a then Assembly member, now Mayor Todd Gloria, on AB 2152, which is also known as Bella's Act, to stop once and for all the sale of male-bred puppies in pet stores. But before we discuss 2152 specifically, I want to talk a little bit about the issue's history. So you may be familiar with prior legislation in California to stop the sale of puppies, kittens, and rabbits. AB 485 was actually enacted in 2017 to prohibit pet store operators from selling dogs, cats, and rabbits in a pet store unless the animal was obtained from a public animal control agency or shelter SPCA, Humane Society, or rescue group that was in a cooperative agreement with a public or private shelter. While the bill passed in 2017, it did not go into effect until 2019 to give pet store owners time to adjust their operations to comply with law. Unfortunately, once our humane law enforcement officers set out to enforce in 2019, it became quickly apparent to us that unscrupulous pet store owners actually used that year to figure out how to maintain business as usual while in compliance with the letter, but not the intent of the law. So as San Diego County was uniquely blessed, shall we say, with the few remaining pet stores in the entire state that still sold dogs, cats, and rabbits, we immediately set about pulling together a coalition of animal welfare stakeholders to develop new legislation to address the loopholes that had allowed these stores to continue the terrible practice of sourcing mill-bred animals and passing them off as rescues with adoption fees that were sometimes upwards of $3,000 per puppy. So thanks to months of collaborative work with Best Friends, the ASPCA, HSUS, Cal Animals, San Francisco SPCA, and Team Gloria, AB 2152 was introduced to replace the complicated enforcement mechanisms that were put in place by AB 485. We used three main provisions. One was implementing a $500 adoption fee cap for all animals adopted out of retail stores. So it only applies to animals that are in a retail storefront. We required adoption fees to be posted in a conspicuous or very visible place for ease of enforcement. And we mandated that spay-neuter surgeries took place on these animals available for adoption before the animal was showcased in a retail store. It was really important for us to ensure that rescue groups were still able to hold adoption events and showcase their animals in retail pet stores, but that the pet stores were not allowed to charge fees for these events or to rescues for showcasing their animals, just concerned about a possible pass-through with that activity. We also included a provision to make rescues in retail stores jointly liable for violations so that everybody has sort of some skin in the game. We feel pretty confident, especially now, that by removing the profit margin from adoption fees, we've removed the incentive for sham rescues and pet store owners to continue shipping mill-bred puppies in from out of state. So the bill was signed by the governor in 2020, and it went into effect earlier this year. And we're super proud to report that at this time, there are no longer any pet stores in San Diego County selling or adopting out imported mill-bred animals. So that was a big win. So looking forward, you know, we're trying to think about what does 2022 look like, and what issues are on the table that still need addressing, and really thinking about the past and what was successful. So as Jennifer talked about the white paper and getting coalitions together and really doing a deep dive and taking a moment to be very thoughtful about where we need to go with animal welfare and supporting members of our community and the animals in our community. And two things that really are surfacing right now as pretty big discussions in the industry are access to veterinary care and behavior services. So even thinking outside of the sheltering world, but specific to what problems are people facing, it certainly does impact sheltering when folks can't afford to keep their animals because they either can't afford care or literally can't find care in their region. So that's something that we're really looking at, trying to meet with stakeholders and collaborate and see, you know, what could possibly be done about that. And then housing insecurity, it's a major issue, and it impacts peoples with their pets. So looking at what kind of policy can impact this in a positive way. Lease and insurance restrictions, meaning that we would love to see a place where restrictions are not placed on leases or insurance requirements on breed, weight, number of animals. And then looking at pets belonging to the unhoused Californians that are either permanently unhoused by choice or transitioning to finding housing, and how can we support the community members and those folks. So that's sort of top of mind right now. We're also going to find ourselves in a place where there are going to be other bills introduced by other animal welfare stakeholders that, you know, we'll have to consider and figure out, you know, whether we're going to engage, take a position one way or the other. And so that's sort of a TBD. We're every year, Jennifer is blessed to sort of be given a heads up often about what might be coming our way. And it's really nice in a lot of circumstances to be able to engage on the front end. There's sometimes pretty bad policy that is suggested, and we are able to sort of stop that before it gets to language stages. But then there are times that, you know, that we're still a little bit surprised. So always keeping a very close eye on what's coming our way.
Yeah. And let me just add a bit to that, to say, San Diego Humane is such a unique organization with having the resources to be able to have a Julianna, to have me involved. There's only 2 shelters in the state of California, San Francisco SPCA is the other one, that see advocacy as so vital to your mission and so important, and that they have exceptional professionals like Julianna on the team to weigh in. Because you can hear now, I mean, some of you probably get, if you're here, you probably get a lot of action alerts from all kinds of organizations. And they're like, stop this today, like make this call to make this go away. And as you've heard from some of what we've described, that devil in the details that Julianna talked about, a lot of things sound great and we're on board with what they sound like. And we're trying to get to the same outcome, but there is so much that can go wrong when, you know, there is so many times that the intentions and the outcomes do not end up matching up. And it's not anyone's fault. I mean, people are not intentionally writing poor law. It's just that oftentimes people their hearts are in the right place, their passion is guided in the right direction, but they don't have the kinds of experiences that San Diego Humane with our humane law enforcement team have, where you're going out to try to write that citation, or you're going out to actually try to deal with these issues on the ground. The law has to be written to enable that to work. And as you described, we've done a whole year worth of a bill that was fixing a bill from just 2 years ago, because we had folks involved with that bill at the time who weren't open to listening to that feedback, who, when we said we're very worried that this won't work the way you describe, and then it turns out that we were sadly right. So I just, like, again, when you're involved, if you're here, you're involved with an organization that takes that so seriously, and the state of California is in debt to San Diego Humane for investing those resources, because these laws are better written and better able to be deployed throughout the whole state because of that investment of energy. So it's had to say that. Next slide. I would like to make a shameless plug. So we focus on pet related stuff tonight, but we are very busy doing wildlife related advocacy as well. We did a workshop a few months ago where we focused on our wildlife advocacy. I have the blessed to represent other organizations besides San Diego Humane that you might have heard of: Oceana, Ocean Conservancy. I'm newly working for the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And one of the things we're super passionate and focused on is reducing single-use plastics. And we have had a vexing time trying to deal with this, despite strong public support across the state. And in the case of animal welfare, and there's so many marine animals and marine birds and fish and others are poisoned, just like people, by plastics that end up in our waterways, our rivers, our beaches, in the ocean itself. And so Californians are fed up with Sacramento being kind of beholden to the plastics and oil industry, which has been blocking meaningful reform, and our system is just broken. And so I have been involved with others. We were able to qualify a ballot measure that will be before you next November 2022, that will set meaningful reduction targets in single-use plastic packaging and foodware. It will ban styrofoam foodware altogether in the state of California, and it will set a new penny per single-use plastic item fee that will be collected by producers and will go to the state to help deeply invest in in better recycling infrastructure. And what I'm most excited about, 30% of the money that gets raised is going to go to environmental protection and cleanup of the damage that's been done to our critters and our coasts by plastic. So I just needed to make that shameless plug because I'm going to be spending a lot of time working on this over the next year. And I'm hoping that San Diego Humane will support it and that you all will vote for it. I will probably come back to you sometime in the next year with a more direct pitch.
You won't have to work too hard, Jen, promise.
Well, thank you. All right. Juliana, is this you or me? I can't remember.
It's a mixture. It's a mixture of both of us. I can start here. Is the question is always, what can I do? So you've heard Jennifer and I, and by I mean the royal, like me as a community member, not me as Juliana representing San Diego Humane. We really encourage you to stay involved, stay in touch with me. Happy to make sure that community engagement provides my contact information with you. If you hear of a policy initiative and wonder if we've taken a position, please reach out. Call on advocates when needed. We are working hard on your behalf in partnership with representatives like Jennifer in Sacramento and the animal welfare associations we belong to, like Cal Animals, we've mentioned a couple of times. There are times when we really need our communities to engage. When you do see those call to actions come through that say, make a phone call, write a letter to stop this thing now, or to get this piece of legislation passed, we really appreciate all of our community members who take the time to do that. Know who your representative is. It's good to know your elected officials. San Diego County is unique in that we have, I may bungle this, but I think 9 assembly members and 6 or 7 senators representing our county just because of our geographical region. We're very large. So it's good to know who your elected official is. To be very frank, legislators want to hear from those they represent. So when an issue is going to be coming before a committee that one of our members sit on, or before the whole legislature, the assembly or the Senate, it's critical that they hear from their constituents. And I always felt a little bit bad about saying this, but I do have a little suggestion of don'ts too. Don't say things like, I pay your salary, or threaten with your vote when they're up for re-election. As a staff member on the receiving end of these comments for many, many years, I can assure you that it does not help get your message across or endear legislators and their staff to your cause. You can be very passionate, but be respectful, and that goes a long way. And please always remember to say thank you. It really means a lot to legislators to know that, especially when you've made a direct ask, that you've been paying attention and that you see what they've done to support.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add other than that if all you did is then committed yourself to every time you ran into one of your elected officials, you were aware, you were ready with one thing to thank them for on behalf of the San Diego Humane Society, you would be doing us an extraordinary mitzvah, because we only have sort of power with them to the extent that they understand that we have a constituency of our own, and that's our supporters, our staff, our adopters, our reach. They know that we're influential, and so part of why we do things like tonight is to make sure like all of the San Diego members were supportive of Todd Gloria's AB 2152. All of them voted in favor of the Blood Bank Modernization Act. All of them supported the budget funding for $50 million for animal shelters. So there's an easy one. Everything we talked about tonight, if you bump into someone who represents the San Diego area and this at the Capitol, please thank them on behalf of yourself as a voter and your family, and on behalf of San Diego Humane. Just that simple act could be so valuable to us going forward.
Yeah. So this is just a fun collage that we put together of our supporters. Many of these folks you saw on previous slides that we've talked about. Now Mayor Todd Gloria and his dog Diego, Governor Gavin Newsom, Senate Pro Tem Tony Atkins, Jennifer, you may have to name a couple of those other ones. That I'm
I
not
see
familiar with.
Assemblymember Richard Bloom with an awfully adorable dog. She may or may not be sleeping right over here, right at the
Could that
current
be your
moment.
dog? Exactly.
And Mr. Bloom authored the blood bank bill. That's Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo from the Los Angeles area and her cute little dog Lulu. And then that's Assemblymember Vince Fong, who just did his own Fong 100. That 100, which is where members basically pay the adoption fee for 100 animals. They sponsor the adoption fee. That was an idea hatched between me and a former Assemblymember Jeff Gurrell years ago, and it does my heart good to see that project like continues to keep going. But these legislators, these elected officials love working on animal issues and are just like the rest of us. They care about their own animals, and they care about our pets, our farm animals, our wild animals, but we got to keep staying in front of them and staying top of mind. But those are pictures that make me happy. And then Juliana, you may have something to add, but I often find sometimes when we give talks like this, people are left with, wow, Juliana and Jennifer sure are great. I hope they keep at it. We're actually hoping that you also see yourself in the opportunity. We just did a little bit of things that you can do, but we all started as people like you, maybe not on a Zoom because we're old. And when we got started doing it, like there was like, not an internet. No, I'm kidding. But like not really kidding. No, we all started out like as just caring Californians who had other day jobs and who I didn't even know what an animal shelter was before the day I walked into one when I was like deep into my 20s. And so we just want to try to inspire you that you don't need to just rely on us to speak up for animals, that you can do it. And if it's whether it's something you always want to do as kind of a side effort to what you do all day long, or you one day want to transition into working full time for animals, we just want to encourage you that there's a role for everyone that cares, and we're just all somebody's.
All right, and that takes us to the very end, the curious slide of questions. So we are here to answer any questions you have. Really want to open it up, and if you don't have questions, you have comments, discussion, we're here for it.
I do have a question. Oh, sorry, Alex. Of course, we would bump heads doing that. I just want to say thank you both. It is such an absolute pleasure to have the honor of working with you guys. These two, I know a lot of us are San Diego Humane on this Zoom tonight, but these two people are just amazing. Juliana, we're lucky to have you. Jennifer, there's no one except for maybe Juliana now that has your breadth of knowledge about what's going on in government. And you two are just awesome, and the animals are really better off because of both of you. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was super enlightening to hear how you all go about making these changes in the state. And I was curious because you talked about what's coming up. And one of the things you mentioned is the shortage of vets. So I'm just curious from a legislative standpoint, what are some of the contributing factors that could be changed at the legislative level to remedy that?
Yeah, money. I think one of the things that I want to point to is doing the deep dive, right? Like Jennifer, you may have more thoughts on this as you've sort of been invested in that conversation for a little bit longer than me personally. But we need to be looking at it first and foremost and making sure that we're not jumping to solutions without making sure that they're going to be effective. So, we may not be able to solve this issue in 2022, but certainly by the end of the year, I hope that we, along with our colleagues, have a path forward for that.
Yeah, I know both our veterinary medical board and then also the California Veterinary Medical Association have both recently kicked off Access to Care Task Force. And so that deep dive thing isn't just something that we're doing kind of in a vacuum across the animal sheltering world, but this is something that the veterinary world is also And by the way, not just randomly, because we advocated to the Veterinary Medical Board that they needed to see within their purview access to care issues, that it's not just regulating and kind of overseeing and making sure the Veterinary Practice Act is being followed by licensed veterinarian professionals, but also that like the fact that we believe there are so many animals and communities that are not getting the kind of veterinary resources that they need, that they needed to be investing themselves as well and kind of trying to diagnose, for lack of a better word, what is causing that? Why aren't veterinarians locating in rural areas? Why are people waiting months? I mean, like, try to go see any of us actually having trouble seeing our veterinarians. We know that veterinarians are having a hard time making the economics work. We know it's an incredibly stressful profession. We know that it has a high suicide rate. We haven't really grown the capacity of UC Davis or Western University to pump out, more veterinarians every year. There's a whole host of things that are contributing to this, and then the cost issues for the average person. But there are whole zip codes in California that don't have veterinarians. Like, that's crazy. So I think, like Julianna's saying, we want to spend some time, and so do our colleagues and others in the veterinary profession are spending some time trying to really meaningfully understand what's going on, why it's happening, what the sources of those problems are. And only then can we start to, I think, identify what solutions there are. It could be things like expanding telehealth and telemedicine so that you can extend the reach of veterinary professionals. It could be maybe, this is like scary for some people, but we have nurse practitioners, right? In the human health world, we've been able to find sort of paraprofessionals and allow certain activities to be done by people with something less, than a full medical doctor degree. Like, can we look to that as a path forward? The expansion of health insurance, pet insurance. Very few people have pet insurance in California, but we know it can be a lifesaver for folks. So I think there's like a lot to unpack there, and there are like policy opportunities. There are explicit laws in the way of practicing veterinary telehealth right now that would need to be changed if we saw that as a real tool for addressing this access issue.
And I just want to note too, just like, legislators aren't always issue area experts. Advocates are not always issue area experts, and that includes me as your government relations professional. Dr. Hedge is actually engaged in this discussion, and she attended the last California Vet Med Board meeting where they started the discussion about access to care. So, we really, when I hear about things that I know are really critical, but know that I may not have the depth of knowledge to be meaningful in the discussion, we reach out to colleagues to make sure that the right folks are at the table to have these discussions.
Gary, you may have thoughts on this topic.
I'm going to unmute myself. There we go. No, the biggest thing that I think was something that you just touched on, Jen, that's the veterinary nurse practitioner model, or the veterinary physician assistant, or the veterinarian assistant model. And actually, that is something that I think we're going to work pretty diligently on in the next year, or probably more like 5 years, because it's going to be very tricky with the California Veterinary Medical Association. But it's already starting in Colorado, and we need to take that baton and really lead that charge. I think that's going to actually be the savior for veterinary medicine. There's no reason that we can't have a nurse practitioner model in veterinary medicine. We constantly track 50 years behind human medicine and vet medicine, maybe 30, maybe 20, but it's time to have something like this roll out. I'm excited about it.
Did we answer your question, Alex?
Totally, thank you.
Good.
Super exciting about the alternative medicine route for different options for careers for people to go into as well, not just for the community, but for people that are trying to grow their career and get into their career. Does anyone have any questions that doesn't have a microphone that they'd like to pop in the chat?
I actually have a question. I was wondering, I know that discussion here was of San Diego Humane and San Francisco doing a lot of the animal advocacy work. And I didn't know, because LA is so very big, if they also have any advocates or animal welfare groups that are working with San Diego and San Francisco, or if these two cities are doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
There are an awful lot. Juliana rattled off quite a few and talking about how we worked on the pet store bill together. The California Animal Welfare Association is the statewide association, and a number of the leaders on their board run shelters in the Los Angeles area. I didn't mean to, the singling out I did of San Diego Humane and San Francisco SPCA is because, to my knowledge, they're the only private animal shelters that have actually created and pay full-time government relations professionals on their staff. Like, they take the advocacy work so seriously that they are paying a professional and hiring a lobbyist to do it. Others tend to they're working through that association, and the directors of those shelters are, basically volunteering their time. Gary, for example, sits on the board of the California Animal Welfare Association. So in almost every other case, they're putting in, dutiful time, and they bring a lot of expertise to the table, and they also do advocacy. It's just these two shelters have really decided that it's part of their core mission to be doing this work with full-time professionals engaged to help make it go well. But there are a number of organizations, both at the local level that are active in Sacramento, around the state, the statewide groups, and then obviously there are national organizations. I also work with Best Friends, for example. So there's a lot of folks bringing their advocacy chops.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
Jerica, you look like you have a question.
I don't. I'm just so excited to see everybody, to hear all your voices, to be honest. This has been really exciting for me. It was a bit of some review and some stuff that I kind of had questions on. At the national level, we get questions from every agency, every jurisdiction is very different, and so they have questions on those on their ordinances and their laws, and they want support to maybe help add laws that they can lean on, at the same time wanting to make sure that there are ways that those same laws, like you guys mentioned, it's the the way that they're written can actually be restrictive as well. And so where is that middle ground? And so it's really interesting listening to this. And I think I don't really have any questions, but I think my question probably would be, what would be your advice be to an agency or even an individual in a resource desert, California or otherwise, that doesn't know where to go, doesn't know who to talk to? I know you had mentioned knowing who their elected officials are, but do you have any other advice that we may pass to any resource desert areas that if they need support with any legislative or advocacy issues?
Yeah, I mean, I would just start with develop the relationships and look local first, right? Like we are in such an incredible place with the state in having the funding put forth in the budget like it has been. That's pretty unique to us, and I don't know that there's going to be a wave of other states following suit in that respect. But even in a state the size of California, it's really important to sort of look local first. Look to the policymakers who are preparing budgets for local shelters and figure out where their priorities are and how you can tie into that. But that relationship development is pretty critical. I mean, you have to know who to talk to before you can have the conversation. Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, I mean, specifically in California, I would say too, if there were locals who are, have questions around their ability to access resources, or even we find a lot of cities and counties have really old ordinances on their books. Yep. That they're tying their own hands. Like they were probably law ordinances that were written to align with like their state law a long time ago. But I feel like but they're actually operating in ways that are probably more costly, that might actually be working against their life-saving goals in some ways, but they feel stuck. They're like, well, it has to be this way. They're not able, with all of the work they're doing, to keep up. And I know one of the cool resources that San Francisco SPCA is now, because they've built some pro bono attorneys who have been reaching out to them for years to be helpful. They've actually started this Shelter Pals program to provide legal services to animal shelters across the state who have questions. Like, they don't have a lawyer, like shelters don't have lawyers. They might go to their city attorney, but their city attorney isn't an animal lawyer. And so they are stepping into where they perceive and they're right, that there's a strong need, like a gap, to help advise shelters on their practices within their shelter. Like, are we doing this right? Do we need to be doing this XYZ step? Should we be holding cats this long? Should we, and they are able to help them evaluate what they're doing and gauge that against what their legal obligations are. And in almost every case, bring them a solution that is both less expensive and pushes them more enables more life-saving. So,
and there's a prime example of that. There were a few shelters in the Central Valley that didn't allow fee waivers. So it was in their code that they had to charge specific fees for relinquishment, redemption, adoptions, whatever the case may be. And so they found themselves in a place where they were holding animals for a ridiculously long time when owners wanted them back, but they couldn't afford the adoption fee. There were cases where owners were just letting their animals go because they couldn't afford the relinquishment fee. And it literally was the specific case of them having tied their own hands with just very outdated policy that hadn't been looked at. And, one of the things that I've spoken to a few groups in the Central Valley in particular is looking at, the local municipal governments, whether it's county or city, are primarily, I would say, driven by budget. And there is a way to show cost savings for things that may not be intuitive to say waiving fees is going to save you money, but there is a way to show that. And those are other avenues to take is to look at those things and figure out where that path forward is.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else have any questions? All right. Well, with that, thank you everyone for attending. We will send a recording of this as well as a PDF of the presentation out tomorrow. And of course, thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Jennifer, for your time, for your information, for your engagement, and we appreciate you both presenting, and we appreciate everyone for attending. So thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your evening.
thanks, everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you.